Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Hi there, welcome to Season 3 of the Estranged Heart podcast. I'm so grateful that I've been here along with you, along with now the co-host AC, for a bit of time, right? Working on year number 3. And that is just amazing to me. I am so very grateful for each and every person who has helped The Estranged Heart to become what it is today. Thank you for making it one of the go-to podcasts for anyone who is estranged or looking for information on estrangement, etc. Thank you so much for that. As a new new season begins, AC and I will be covering an educational series in the month of November. We will be doing this throughout the year on varying topics, but this month's topic is on communication, and we will be breaking those down over the next 3 episodes. So today's episode, we cover how to prevent estrangement because of the way that we communicate and styles of communication, etc. And if we feel like we need to estrange, is there a way of communicating that differently versus ghosting or just silence? So I think it will be very interesting for you to have a listen to our conversation around that. And as always, we welcome feedback. If you'd like us to dig in a little deeper for a particular topic, please let us know. If you have other topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know. And as a reminder, there's nearly 100 episodes on this podcast. So please go back and have a look through prior episodes. Perhaps what you're searching for we've already covered, or I have already covered. And you're welcome to look back through all of those episodes on any of the major podcast platforms, or by going to the website, TheEstrangedHeart.com, and looking for answers there. But if something has not been covered, or you would like us to delve in a little deeper on a particular topic that has already been discussed, please let us know. Send us an email to TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com. Again, TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com, and we're happy to answer questions or add topics to the conversation. As a reminder, the validation workshop that I will be facilitating and hosting is this next weekend on Saturday, November the 11th. If you have an interest in learning about the superpower of validation, what it is, what it's not, and how it can improve all of your relationships, not just the one with your estranged adult child, but with every relationship that you have, I highly encourage you to consider attending this workshop. If you're interested in doing so, again, please send me an email, TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com. And again, all of this information will be in the show notes for this episode. Also, a reminder, applications are open now for new members for the Estranged Parents and Estranged Adult Children Facebook discussion group. There is an application process to this. So if you're interested in that, please email me again, and I'm happy to send you an application. This group is for estranged parents and estranged adult children from different families. And for those individuals who are looking to learn and grow and heal and not, it is not a discussion group for someone to come in and be a lurker and not participate. And it is not a group for someone to come into if they're looking to point fingers and blame, etc. It really is a discussion group about learning and growing, asking questions, seeing things from other side's perspective, etc. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email and I'm happy to send you out the application. And I think that is all for today, except I have two quotes before we jump into the episode today. The first quote is, "To effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others." And that is by Tony Robbins. And the second is, "The most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and to be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them." And that is by Ralph G. Nichols. And with that, on to today's episode. So let's begin talking about communication, and when we believe that estrangement is necessary, how do we go about communicating that? Do we communicate it? Do we not? Do we ghost? Do we have a conversation around that? Have we had conversations around that? And what does that look like? And is there a better way, a better approach to communicating a need to estrange?
Communication in general, I find to be really, really tough for most people. And I know you often like to start off episodes with a quote.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I didn't do any homework, so I don't have the quote ready. So I'm probably going to misquote it a little bit. But the idea is that the greatest myth in communication is the idea that it has taken place.
Mm,
And what
yes.
I take that to mean is that more often than not, we're understanding the combinations of words perhaps that are being sent towards us, but we tend to miss the meaning. We end up talking past each other to a degree. We just assume that we understand what the situation is, what the intent of the person talking to us is. We assume that our heart is coming through and that the words that we are sending are being received in the ways that we had hoped that they would be received. And we could spend hours talking and walk away not having the faintest bloody clue about where the other person is coming from. And from where I sit, I think that's that seed that estrangement ultimately is going to grow out of, is just that completely missing the mark form of quote unquote communication, but like not real communication. Just I thought we understood each other, but clearly not.
Right.
Am I
So
making
that,
sense?
yeah. So, no, I totally agree. I absolutely agree that we more often than not feel like we have adequately communicated our thoughts in a way that the other person, well, I think more often than not, is they should have understood what I said.
Right.
Again, going with the assumptions, and maybe this is where the piece of curiosity comes in, right? In asking questions. Have I clarified my needs? Have I put it in different ways to be able to get the same point across, but have said it differently in um, multiple different avenues and ways? You and I talked about before we started recording about just that. You know, we think at times we have conveyed things, but what we've done is we've said the same thing over and over and over again in the exact same way and are expecting different results, versus trying to word it differently and things like that. So I think there's a lot of moving parts and pieces as we talk about communication, how it can help or hinder the estrangement process, and where does it leave the other person, right? Be that the parent and or the adult child. So if we look at communication and where do we start? I know that my girls told me that, we tried to talk to you. We told you over and over and over again, and you didn't listen. So this was our only choice, was to estrange. And when they estranged, I was left with, what the hell has just happened? I don't understand. Right. And sometimes I
Be
wonder, go ahead.
I just like I don't want to cut you off, but I also don't want you to get too far deep into this because you started off asking a question of where do we start?
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you asked that, it occurred to me that without even premeditating this whole approach, you and I had already accidentally demonstrated how we start. I explained a point in a way that made sense to me. I ended that with saying, I don't know if I'm making sense. You didn't just say, yes, you're making sense to me, and we just assumed that I was understood and moved on. You also didn't interrupt me with reflective listening. You waited till I was finished. I said, I don't know if I'm making sense. You said, I think so. And then you put things into your own words at that point, which made it clear to me that I had made sense to you and that my message was received. If every pair of people would start there,
Right.
I think we'd all be in a much better place. Anyway, sorry, I hate cutting people off mid thought, but I couldn't let that one slip.
No, no, let's go back to that. I'm glad that you did. Um, you know, I've done an episode before in the past, and you and I've talked about it too, intention versus impact, right? And how that lands with someone if we don't have a sense of curiosity, if we're not asking questions, if we're not trying to clarify, if we're not doing the reflective listening in a way that the other person can go, oh yeah, they get it. They understand what I've been trying to say. Where does that leave us? We haven't communicated anything. No one understands anything. Both people walk away feeling frustrated, or one party walks away feeling frustrated because they don't feel like the other person heard them, and the other person says, oh yeah, I totally understand where they're coming from. And so that person then that says, oh yeah, I totally understand where they're coming from, is expecting life just to go move right along as it always has. Meanwhile, the other person is like, I'm done. I'm done
Mm.
talking. I'm not I'm not entering this anymore, and they cut off all contact. Then what? This is where we have parents who talk to us about, I don't understand what happened. I thought everything was fine. I thought everything was good. Yeah, we've had our bumps, we've had disagreements, and there's been things I didn't understand really well, but we always worked our way through it. Meanwhile, the other person, typically the adult child, is saying, oh my God. They never hear me. They never understand what I'm talking about. They're always making assumptions. And again, you and I also talked about this whole always piece. They always misconstrue what I'm saying, think they know everything, and they know absolutely nothing about me. So how do we bridge this? I don't want this to necessarily go into a conversation about how do we reconcile, because that's not necessarily where we're going with this conversation on communication, but rather trying to drill down and finding out where are we, where are the missteps? Are there missteps? Is there a different way? I don't know. Maybe there's not. Maybe this is a piece of it that has to play out.
There's so, like you said, there's a lot of moving pieces, but and communication, it does seem to break down in a million and one different ways, but honestly, I don't think it breaks down in as many ways as people think it actually is the case. I think back on, I had one friend, and when I would reach out to them, the first question would be, what do you need from me right now?
Mm,
Do you need a shoulder to cry on? Do you need somebody to agree with you, somebody to challenge you, or somebody to help solve the problem?
mm.
Because how I receive your words is going to depend on what your needs of the conversation are.
That's beautiful.
Powerful stuff, right?
Yeah, very
And
powerful.
so much gets avoided. Like if your kids, your daughters had come to you pre-estrangement and said, "Mother, we need to lay out a list of things here. We need to whatever," and you were to say, "Okay, girls, like what is it you need from me?" Blah blah blah. And they said, "Well, you know what, Mom, we need you to listen without feeding back in this moment, and we need you to, instead of thinking of how to organize a defense against what we're saying,
Hmm.
try to understand where we're coming from. This is being delivered without judgment. We're not saying this is the case. We're saying this is how we feel. Can you
Hmm.
please listen with that understanding?" If you had been able to do that for them, who knows? Maybe the estrangement wouldn't have happened. Maybe a lot of things, right? Maybe it would have
Right,
opened the door to another 6 months of negotiations.
right, right,
But we need to know, like, first of all, what is this conversation?
right.
Just like you and I did before we started recording today. What are we talking about today? Let's
Hmm.
clearly define it, and let's avoid everything that has nothing to do with it.
Right,
That's productive.
right. So what do you do then, though, with, you know, folks who feel like they've tried and tried and tried, again, generally the kids, and it's never been received well. They anticipate it's not going to be received well, and then it's not received well. And then here we are, kind of circle back to square one with, this is not working, and I need to estrange. I need to I need I need to take a break to figure out what I want from this relationship, what I need from this relationship, if anything, and what is needed to move this relationship forward from here. Maybe redefining the relationship, etc. But I need time for that to happen. And instead of just, and I, trust me, I get it. You know, I was once in a estranged adult child myself. I get it. You feel like, my God, I've done all the things. I've said all the things. I'm frustrated to no end, and I'm just done. And so you just throw your hands up in the air and say, screw this, I'm out. Is there another way to, is there a better way to estrange or not?
I don't like jumping straight to the estrangement because I like to focus a little bit more on any possible prevention. I mean,
Okay. Well, let's talk about it.
because I think if we address all the possible ways to prevent it, if we've exhausted all of those options and it's like, hey, there's nothing left,
Hmm.
well, you know what's left, I would argue, is a healthy estrangement,
Right.
or a necessary one, unavoidable, whatever.
Hmm.
So I mean, I don't want to like sound like I'm trying to take the conversation off topic. I'm really not. I think that um we need to look at, first of all, like if let's do a little bit of role playing here, or imaginary
Hmm.
situational role playing, right? You're my mom, I'm your kid,
Hmm.
and I got issues with you and I want to take you to task. It'd be real easy for me to come up with a list of stuff that I'm going to come hit you and say, Mom, you this, you that, you disappointed me. I didn't get to go to summer camp, but my sister did, all this kind of stuff. And you're like, wait, you're being unreasonable here, you little
Hmm.
jerk. Or I could sit there and take a slightly different approach. And one of the things that, again, I'm going to give a shout out to my therapist, Nicole. Hey, um, one of the exercises that she had suggested when dealing with somebody who's close to me and difficult is to write down 20 things I like about them and 20 things I don't like about them. And I tell you, that wasn't an easy exercise. When I came back to her and said, okay, yeah, I got 20 of each. What now? I said, do you want to go through them? She says, oh, I'm not interested in what's on the list. I'm just curious, which list were you able to write down faster?
Yeah.
Because that will tell you where your focus is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we had talked to a client a while back, and they had expressed to us that their kid had had itemized things in letter form, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like as the parent, which one do I focus on? Well, that's for the parent to decide, I suppose. Don't want to get too far into the details there, but my guess is that because the negative one came first, that was probably the easier one. That's probably where the kid was coming from, was from a negative place. And if it's me, if I've written down these two lists about my mom, and I'm trying to decide, okay, like how do I approach here? If I realize that like I came up with 20 angry, hurtful, disappointing things just like really quick,
Mm-hmm.
and it took me a long, long time to think of the good stuff that mom's done for me, maybe I got to take a moment to think about, okay, why am I focused on the bad, not the good? Like, why is this stuff standing out so much? Why do
Mm-hmm.
I feel so strongly compelled to go take mom to task?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good place to take a break, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to like keep on monologuing. I mean, you got any thoughts on this so far?
No, I agree. Um, I love the exercise that your therapist recommended. That is brilliant. Because it does show you exactly where your thoughts are, what you're focused on, and there is a reason why you are focused on those things, right? And so, if,
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective and the work that I do with clients, is really pulling back the emotional piece. Why is this so emotionally triggering for me? Because that's generally how we come up with a list, and so fast, like they've done this, right? Um, I also wonder, you and I also discussed prior to recording, this, black and white thinking, and
Mm-hmm.
where does that come in? Um, and we talked about the fact that we're dealing with, um, I know older generations, to include my own parents, typically come from a very black and white perspective on things. It either is or it isn't. There is no gray. There is no in between. And when you have conveyed, taken mom to task, as you say, um, and you tell her that she has, again, I hesitate to use these descriptors, but she has narcissistic ways, or that she's toxic, etc. If we're coming from black and white thinking, there's this, it's either no, I am not, or yes, I am. When in reality, we're really both. It's an and, right? And I use that a lot with my clients as well. Instead of a but or an or, it's an and,
Right.
right? I am not narcissistic. I don't have a diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder. And I do have moments that are narcissistic. I am not a toxic person overall, but have there been times when I have said or done things that could be toxic to someone else?
Right.
Yes, right? So therein lies an issue with one side of that. If we look at the kids, you brought up and mentioned that, I've talked before about, we're not dealing with an adult person. We're typically dealing with the inner child. It's not really this 40-year-old man standing in front of you. It's this 5-year-old little boy standing in front of you who is deeply hurt. And kids tend to think in black and white again. So if we have all of this black and white thinking going on, and we're not following up the communication with curiosity and questions and reflective listening, etc. All of these things that most of us are not taught. So let's just put that out there too, right? I mean, I certainly wasn't taught that. I'm sure you weren't either. It's something we have to learn how to do. Is it any wonder, to get back to the quote that you mentioned at the start of today's episode, we think we're communicating and we're really not.
I feel like we could spend probably the next 30 episodes talking just about communication.
Of course. Yeah.
There's so much, but I mean, one thing I love that you always mention is, always about the curiosity component. If we hang on to that curiosity, a couple things I like about it. One is curiosity is a very personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's something, I can sink my emotional teeth into, right? I maintain and develop that curiosity. The other thing is the curiosity is a motivator. It's a beautiful thing because I by no means am pointing fingers at anybody. This is something I struggle with all the time. Is if I engage in heated conversation, heated dialogue with somebody where I feel as though I'm being unfairly challenged or accused,
Mm-hmm.
I start feeling defensive and then I become determined to win
Mm.
the
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And it ties back into something that, we've talked about again before, is that, we need to focus more on what is right rather than who is right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the curiosity really makes that a lot easier to get to, like, what are we trying to accomplish with this conversation? And I think every conversation we approach, that's something that we both need to ask of ourselves. We should probably ask of the other person, and
Mm-hmm.
also volunteer what we're hoping the conversation is going to be about, right? We
Mm-hmm.
know how to ask these questions, like how to define what's going on in different contexts. What do you want for dinner? Where do you want to go for vacation? What are we talking about right now?
Mm-hmm. Right.
How are we approaching each other? What is the conversational goal? I came to you months ago when I had a frustrating family situation. It's like, look, I keep on bringing up with, or years ago, I kept on bringing up with this family member the fact that I had interest in connecting, in a meaningful, deep, heartfelt way. And you'd said, well, is there something wrong with just asking, is it okay to have a conversation? First of all, take all the pressure out of it. Second of all, you've clearly
Mm-hmm.
defined what you're looking for today.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that with each other. Doesn't matter, friends, family, coworkers, like all of us. Let's just broaden it out. No sense losing anybody over
Right.
a poorly managed conversation. One of the things that the habit I picked up from my wife is I like to think of myself as a very, very clear communicator. I'm careful with the words that I choose. Everything makes sense in my head. I
Mm-hmm.
do catch myself occasionally, as I did at the beginning of this conversation. Hey, am I making sense?
Mm-hmm.
When I ask her that question, sometimes like, hey, am I making sense? Her response is kind of a beautiful one. And it's one I've started using myself is, actually, I don't understand. Can you
Mm.
explain to me using different words?
Mm.
Because I find that a lot of the time, again, not pointing fingers, looking at myself as an example, if I'm saying something to you, you don't understand me, and you say, okay, I'm not getting it, I might alter my approach in very, very subtle ways, alter my phrasing subtly, but I'm effectively repeating myself. And you didn't
Right.
understand the first time. You're not going to understand the 10th time using the same words. Maybe I need to employ an analogy. Maybe I need to step back from the situation and say, okay, instead of talking about you and me, let's say it's our dog and our cat,
Mm-hmm.
and they're having a problem, like
Right.
um when my dad was doing missionary work years ago when I was a kid, he noticed that if you try preaching fire and brimstone to people and challenging them in their life choices, they become hostile in their defense of themselves. But if
Mm-hmm.
you put on a puppet show and the puppets are saying the
Mm-hmm.
same things to each other, everything suddenly becomes very, very easy to accept. I mean, I'm not suggesting that parents and children, adult children, pull out puppets and say, hey, this is my
Right.
problems with your mom. But there's a way
Right.
to metaphorically do that.
Right. Right.
Let's just think about all these different things. I mean, a lot of words to say this. Don't be afraid to mix up your approach. Because if the
Mm-hmm.
same thing hasn't worked over and over and over again, it probably isn't going to work this time. What
Right.
got you here will not get you there.
Correct. Oh, that's such a big one. Oh, that's such a big one. Right. Yeah. So we take this approach of rewording things, getting out of the black and white thinking, right? Doing the reflective listening, asking someone, getting curious, asking someone, what did you mean by that? Because I think you meant this. And the other person can then either agree with that or say, oh no, absolutely not. That's not what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's clarification, which then can typically de-escalate. And I think that's what we're talking about, trying to de-escalate the defensiveness and things that come about. Again, the black and white thinking with, you know, mom, I don't like it when you said this and that and the other thing to me, those two occasions. And mom's like, well, you think I'm always this, that, or the other thing. When in reality, what they actually said was this, these two occasions, right? Um, Something that I just want to kind of throw in here. I know this is, I mean, it's about communication, but it's a little off topic, but I still think it can apply here because we're talking about I hear this often with parents and adult children who their adult children are in therapy, and the adult child will say, "My therapist said I should estrange from you,"
Mm.
or those types of things, right? Or that you're toxic or you're narcissistic, etc. And what I always try to encourage my clients to get curious around is that really what the provider, the therapist actually said? Or could it be possible that it's easier, kind of going back to the puppet thing, it's easier to blame, to put it off on the therapist than to tell you, person to person, this is what I want and need, right? And kids will tend to do that then to not hurt a parent. They'll say, well, instead of I need this time and space, they'll say, my therapist said I should do this. And so I'm going to follow what my therapist said. So again, what we're hearing, there are defense mechanisms that come into play with this, the black and white thinking, the assumptions, all of the things that impede the flow of communication. And yet we think that communication is this easy thing, that it's, well, sure, I'm talking, I'm speaking words, so therefore I'm communicating. When
Right.
communication is something so far beyond
Okay. So we've said all of that, which is basically like took a wide, wide path around what you originally were trying to drive
that.
at,
Right.
which is how do we approach a situation where we feel we need to estrange, but approach it in a healthy and a more functional way?
Mm-hmm.
And I think while we haven't painted a complete picture of healthy communication, I think we've given everybody enough to think about where they got a general idea of the philosophy that should be driving your
Mm-hmm.
communications
Right.
before jumping straight to just cutting somebody off.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've cleared up that quite often we think that we've communicated our reasons for estrangement before getting to the point where we feel estrangement is necessary, only to find out later, well, hey, maybe mom wasn't understanding what I was saying. Maybe my kid wasn't trying to be a snot nosed little prick. Maybe he had a point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a lot of stuff, right? But let's assume that we've approached everything healthy. Let's assume that we've made every reasonable effort available to us to make sure the communication has happened in the most productive possible way in our individual situation. But we still reach the point where I got to come and say, Mom, um, I just I can't.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think one of the things that you and I have been talking about the last little while, and this is something that I don't know why I never thought about it before. Maybe I should have, is like this whole idea of just ghosting somebody, right? Like I feel like um I feel like I'm well justified in severing contact with a family member. I feel like they should understand me. I feel like a lot of stuff. And maybe I have, in some casual ish way, said, look, like, if this is the way things are going to keep going, I can't be around for that.
Mhm.
I think it's a reasonable assumption based on something that you had mentioned a little bit earlier. I think it's a reasonable assumption that, mom might be hearing me say this and think, well, he said this a bunch of times. Usually he just needs to like blow his cork,
Mhm.
take a week or two to go and whatever.
Mhm.
And then he'll come up for air and then we can have a conversation. We can settle our differences and then just carry on as quote unquote normal.
Mhm.
So when mom's sitting there expecting me to show up a couple weeks later and I don't, and then 6 months go by in a year, even though I told her, like, I can't be around this, did I really tell her? Was the
Right.
or else clearly defined,
Mm.
right? Like, I know it's not the same thing as going to marriage counseling, but years ago when I did see a marriage counselor with my ex-wife, won't recommend the counselor, obviously. Well, one of the things that he had told us, which was actually good advice, was if you're upset, you need some space. Don't just say I need some space and storm out of the room, slam the door, and then give your partner the cold shoulder for the next 2 weeks. You say, look,
Mhm.
I need 45 minutes to go take a walk.
Mhm.
I need to sleep on this. Can we talk about it when we get home from work tomorrow? There has to be a clearly defined schedule of events, right?
Mhm.
So taking it away from husband and wife, taking it to mom and me. Mom, I need some time to calm down because I feel like if things are going to keep following this pattern, that I'm going to be tempted to just sever all contact. I don't want that.
Mm. Mm.
Then after the 2 weeks have gone by, whatever, and I pop up for air, we can maybe take a more serious look at things. It may be a case of I can't handle this merry-go-round anymore. This cycle of us getting upset with each other, me taking a couple weeks to calm down, I come crawling back, we have a cup of tea and everything's fine. I can't do this anymore.
Mhm.
I need to go get myself into therapy. I need to get some coaching. I need to read some books. I need to whatever. I still love you. And it's because I love you, I need to take my leave right now.
Mhm.
I don't know for sure when I'm going to be back, but I can promise you it's not going to be 2 weeks.
Right.
I don't know if I'm going to need a month or 6 or a year, but I will update you as far as where I'm at as soon as I figure that out. Don't expect me to call you on the weekend. You may hear from me on Saturday. You may hear from me a year from Saturday, but as soon as I've got a clearly defined idea of where I'm at, I will let you know. I promise you that much. And I think that if we take that approach to estrangement, at least we save the other person that, well, and it's so weird. I mean, I just talked about this not too long ago on In the Blood, like that need to get closure, right?
Mhm.
And closure is it's a weird concept. I won't go into it here. Anybody wants to hear my thoughts on that, you know where to find it.
Right.
But closure, I mean, it's like trying to hold a handful of water sometimes. I mean, it just slips through our fingers. It's like we know we need it. We need to hang on to it. but there's nothing to hang on to because the other person's given us nothing to work with. And what's come up every time we've ever talked to an estranged adult child is that the first thing that comes out of their mouth usually is, if we ask them, do you love your parent? Yes, of course I do.
Yeah.
If you love somebody, don't leave them hanging like that. That just, I understand the need for distance. I understand the need to sever contact, but if somebody had explained to me how cold it was just to say nothing for years, it's not a chance I would have done that to somebody I loved. And maybe I can't personally handle the triggering experience of talking to somebody who just sets me right the F off.
Mm-hmm.
I can send a neutral third party.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't like jumping straight to writing a letter, but I mean, if that's the option that's available, get somebody to help you compose it who's not going to wind you up.
Right.
Just, I know you've got probably better articulated thoughts on this than I'm offering right now, but long story short, let them know what they're dealing with on the way out the door, please.
Yeah. And I recognize a lot of people when they when estrangement happens. I've run into estranged adult children who have thought about it, who have formulated a plan, who have been methodical in, okay, I'm going to estrange, and these are the things that I need from my parent. I need them to do A, B, C, and D. And when they've done A, B, C, and D, then I'm open to a conversation. I find more often than not, what happens is a catalyst event.
Hmm.
And that catalyst event is a very triggering, oh my God, I've got to get out of here and get out of here now. And I don't have the wherewithal within me to tell you jack, let alone be kind about it and tell you I might come back and, we can talk about this later. Um, that being said, I would like to encourage adult children to consider, after you've been able to remove yourself from, if you have one of these catalyst events and you're able to remove yourself and get some space and you're able to calm down, is to reach out in some form or fashion and then have a mini conversation of what you just said. I was really triggered when you said such and such. I need some space, and for the foreseeable future right now, I cannot have communication with you. I am in therapy, or I'm looking to go into therapy, and I'm wanting to try to figure this out for myself. I love you, but right now I cannot be with you. Right? So that there's some sort of something for parents to go on, and I'm not saying it because I know, don't you kids don't come after me, because I know they're going to say, we have done that. We have talked to them and we have tried, and now you're blaming us and telling us it's our fault and we need to, do this for our parents. That's not what I'm saying. I am trying to help you to empower yourself, because when you can take back the reins of the conversation and say, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, this is how long I'm going to do it for, and then this is what I will do after that. It puts you back in the seat of power for your own life versus a quasi running from your parent. Does that make sense at all for you as a former estranged adult child?
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you addressed that, say that like you're not coming after us, because I mean, if it wasn't that I knew you as well as I do now,
Mm-hmm.
I would probably have been feeling antagonized and like there was an
Right.
unreasonable amount of pressure being dumped on me. And yeah, we absolutely need to figure out how to empower ourselves. And when you mentioned the empowerment thing too, something popped into my head, which I know that there's going to be some people listening to this that are thinking, yeah, but I want to address one specific yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
because it's an important one. And I'm going to probably get to the point where I'm irritating people to whom this doesn't apply because I'm going to keep on repeating it over and over. It's important. If abuse is a motivating factor in your estrangement, none of this necessarily applies. You
Correct.
are not obligated to put up with excuse. You are not obligated to give an abuser closure. None of that. This is something I've actually been working with a client on who has given me permission to share elements of her story where I feel it would be helpful to others. And this is one element that we've discovered together is that her estranged adult child is abusive towards her. So trying to chase after, well, what could have been done differently, it doesn't matter. That person has abused you. That person is continuing to abuse you, either directly or indirectly. You are not obligated to put up with abuse. Nobody is ever obligated to put up with abuse. Nobody deserves it. Nobody asked for it. Nothing you do will change the abuser's motivation. The abuser needs help. They do not
Right.
need your intervention.
Correct. Correct. No, I am not in any way, shape, or form. I work with estranged adult children. I in no way blame them in telling them they need to get their shit together and get in touch with their parents and all of this stuff. Just like I don't tell parents, you need to get your shit together and do whatever it is that your kid says you need to do, right? What I'm trying to say is that there's power in being able to say, these are things I need
Mm-hmm.
versus running and expecting someone to automatically know or figure it out or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think for all of us, in some small way, when we do that, there's a piece of us that still says, I wonder if they really understood what I meant, right? And
Yeah.
so when you can be clear, when you can state your needs, and I would say the same thing like in a romantic relationship. If you go in and you state your needs, there's a sense of an exhale that can happen that says, finally, I spoke what I needed to speak. And then there's less of a victim mentality and stance and more of an empowered place of being in the world. And that is what I'm trying to get across to folks today. I'm not, if you are in an abusive relationship, none of this applies. If you are being abused, it does not apply. Outside of that, all of us could learn
Mm-hmm.
as we begin to wrap up this conversation. All of us can learn how to communicate differently in ways that do less harm. I'm always, an advocate and fan of and talk often about nonviolent communication. There are ways that we can have communication with people that doesn't harm people. And I think that we need more of that in our society. And it has to begin with us and our own feeling of empowerment. And I don't mean power over someone else. I mean our own internal self-power versus a lie down and take it or a running away. Again, outside of abusive situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that folks will take what we've shared today, understanding that, I think maybe giving some reflection, if you're not, we've talked a lot about today about maybe how to prevent estrangement, if we can have um, a a dialogue that is communicative and understood, how we can prevent estrangement from happening. But if you are currently estranged, I'm hoping that this will help you to have some, give some reflection to how do you communicate with others. And I don't necessarily mean you're a estranged person in your life. How do you communicate with others?
Mm.
How do you communicate with your spouse? How do you communicate with the boss, with colleagues, etc.? And improving the ways that we talk and the conversations that we have and the expectations we have on others and the things, the assumptions we make, etc. Are we curious around that communication and things like that? So that's kind of leaving it as where I'd like to leave it today. What are your final thoughts?
I want to encourage everybody to consider the curiosity element. Very, very strongly consider this, not just as it applies outwardly, the curiosity about the other party, but also get curious about yourself.
Right.
Instead of asking, why are they doing this to me? Ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? Look at what
Mm-hmm.
your motivators are. Is this tied into previous trauma? Are you reacting to something that happened long before this person walked into the room?
Right.
These are good things to think about. I also like to shamelessly plug my own project, In the Blood podcast, because I do think it applies to what we're talking about today. That show explores um, basically like relationships in general, relationship with self, relationship with others, how they all tie together. Communication is an ongoing and focal theme of that project. And I don't like using a lot of words to say things I've already said. So check that out. Also, the back catalog for this show is getting huger by the week. There is so much good stuff that I don't want to say it's lost, but it just the sheer number of episodes, things can get buried.
Right.
Just even if you just pick one at random, I
Mm-hmm.
promise you, you're going to find something useful in there. The communication, the curiosity. I don't want to say the rules of engagement, the rules of estrangement, maybe they're peppered throughout every single episode. Don't be afraid of revisiting things. Maybe because you're in a different mindset today, you may
Right.
listen to an old episode and get something totally different out of it. So
Yeah.
just, yeah, more information, good information. It's there. Look for it, enjoy it. Also, wanted to encourage anybody who's struggling with this difficult thing that is estrangement, whether you are worried that, hey, I think that there is one looming and I don't want it, whether one has just happened, maybe it's been dragging on for a long time and you're looking to get the hell out of it because well, we all know it's no fun.
Right.
You're not in this alone. You are free to join the support group that Creed and I are moderating, facilitating on Facebook. If you need a more personalized approach, you can book coaching sessions with Creed and or I. If you would like to get something like that set up, then please email Creed at theestrangedheart@gmail.com. And other than that, I think Tony, or I guess AC, for that's how the rest of
Yeah.
you know me. I just outed myself. I'm done talking.
Thank you. Thanks, AC. Yes, I think that support is so important, and each estrangement, just as each person is different, there's, while there are common threads, I talk about this all the time too, there are common threads in all estrangement cases, but every estrangement situation is different. And until, you know, oftentimes it's hard to figure out, what to do. Canned formulas, etc., don't typically work well when it comes to estrangement. This is a very personal topic, and it's a very personal, to the kids, to the adults, and sometimes it really takes that personal approach for someone to help you to sort through and figure things out. So just let us know if we can be of support and help with that. So we will wrap it up for today. Thanks again for listening, and we will meet you here again next week. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.